So the next one we have on the list is the horrifying true stories
of Katy Perry's ex.
Right, from Mr. Ballen, and we're both fascinated with this guy. We like his storytelling nature and narrative, nature and whatnot. So we're gonna watch this one.
He's a good storyteller.
Yeah, he is. Are you a Katy Perry fan?
I wouldn't say I am a fan, but I like some of her music.
I don't really know. I mean, she's got "I Kissed a Girl," right? Mm-hmm. I know that song. What else does she do?
I don't know names.
Yeah.
I just know the words when it comes.
But how bad can Katy Perry's ex be? Really?
We'll see.
We're going to see. I mean, it says it's a horrifying story, but I guess we'll check out right now. Let me switch screens. If you guys are new around here, please consider liking and subscribing. And let's switch screens and get right on into it. Here we go. The horrifying true story of Katy Perry's ex.
Today's story is about a famous Hollywood actor who did something truly horrific, and surprisingly, not that many people know about it. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right channel because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button their favorite food, a burrito, but separate the meat, cheese, rice, and sour cream into 4 distinct sections before rolling it up. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story. Before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to Billy Jensen, who is a fantastic true crime investigative journalist who wrote the article for the LA magazine called The Secret Life of Johnny Lewis. That article was used extensively in the making of today's video. So thank you, Billy.
You recognize that name?
Johnny Lewis was only 7 years old when he landed his first acting role. Granted, it was only a bit part in an obscure escalator safety video, but it was a start. From there, Johnny appeared in dozens of commercials, including with Pizza Hut, before someone recognized this kid has real talent, and he earned appearances on the hit TV shows Seventh Heaven, Malcolm in the Middle, and Drake and Josh, which were really big
Malcolm in the Middle.
late
I like that
90s
show.
and early 2000s.
Drake and Josh.
In 2001, when Johnny was 18 years old, he had made enough money from acting that he was able to leave his parents' home in North Los Angeles and move into a new home right in Hollywood with a bunch of other up-and-coming actors and actresses. By 2006, when Johnny was 23 years old, he was riding high. He had landed several more big TV roles, like a recurring role in the show The OC, which was very popular in the 2000s. And in 2006, he was dating the mega pop star Katy Perry. And although their romance was relatively short, apparently it was very intense because Katy would go on to write 2 songs that were apparently about Johnny. But Johnny's real rise to stardom occurred 2 years later in 2008 when he was cast as the character Half-Sack on the critically acclaimed motorcycle drama Sons of Anarchy. While the show made him famous and fabulously wealthy, Johnny was growing concerned with the direction the show was taking.
Okay, I know Sons of Anarchy.
Why we haven't seen it?
Yeah, I don't know if you watched it on your own.
I have not, no.
But you said you were in like the OC and Seventh Heaven and all that stuff?
Yeah, you see that Drake and Josh.
I love Malcolm in the Middle.
Malcolm in the Middle.
That's what I know.
I don't remember him, though.
Oh, really?
No.
No.
I don't.
His face isn't really like ringing a bell with me or anything, so... But he's been on a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and Sons of Anarchy is like a big show.
Yeah, people keep recommending that to me. I mean, for years, people would tell me I need to check it out. I don't think I'd like it. I'm not a big fan of motorcycles.
Yeah, but...
Maybe we could check it out.
Yeah, we could still like it.
He felt like it was becoming too violent. Johnny liked reading poetry and studying philosophy and staying up late drinking tea and playing chess. He did not like acting out scenes of gratuitous violence. It just wasn't who he was. So after being on the show for 2 seasons very successfully, he was a very popular character. He went to the writers and said, "You gotta write me out of the script. I can't do this anymore." The writers were totally caught off guard and begged him to stay, but he had made up his mind, and so in 2009, his character was killed off. After leaving Sons of Anarchy, Johnny decided that he wasn't going to pursue any serious acting roles for the time being. Instead, he wanted to focus his time on writing his first novel, which was about this musical genius trying to make his way in the world. And so he started asking around to see if anybody he knew of a quiet place he could live and write out of. And his photographer said, I think I know the place. It was called the Writer's Villa, and it was this beautiful house with 6 bedrooms for rent right outside of Hollywood. Over the years, it had become a sort of safe haven for up-and-coming actors and actresses still looking to land their big break. The reason it developed this reputation was because of the owner, Kathy Davis. She was this wonderful woman who really understood how difficult trying to break into Hollywood was for all these people that stayed at her house. And so she would look after them and make them food and offer them rides, and she would stay up late and listen to their frustrations and be a shoulder to cry on if they didn't get the part they wanted. Many of her tenants, who went on to be big Hollywood stars, would later attribute their success, at least in part, to the time they spent with Kathy at the villa, which they remembered as being therapeutic and soothing. Even though Johnny had already had his big break in The Sons of Anarchy, he loved the idea of living in such a peaceful place that seemed to cater to eccentric artists like himself. So in April of 2009, Johnny called Kathy and requested a room, and she said, absolutely, you can stay on the 2nd floor in the red suite. After moving in, Johnny would tell his friends that the writer's villa was just as amazing as he thought it was going to be. And Kathy specifically was just as wonderful as everyone said she was. He actually struck up a friendship with her almost immediately. Everything seemed to be going really well for Johnny in his life until a few months later, he found out his girlfriend, Diane, was pregnant. Although this totally screwed up his plans for his novel, Johnny was really excited about being a father, and so he decided to move out of the villa and in with Diane, who lived nearby, to help take care of their child. 9 months later, on April 6th, 2010, Diane gave birth to a healthy little girl named Culla May, and Johnny and Diane fell madly in love with her. But unfortunately, Johnny and Diane's love for each other faded quickly after becoming parents, and before long, Johnny had moved out and back in with his parents. Not long after that, Johnny and Diane became embroiled in this really vicious, long custody battle over Culla May, which ultimately Johnny lost, which was devastating for him. A few months later, in October of 2011, when Johnny was still living with his parents, he decided to take his motorcycle out and just go ride around and clear his head. And so he drove for about 2 hours to the west of LA out into the desert, where he lost control of his bike and he crashed. After getting to the hospital, his injuries were determined to be relatively minor, except they were concerned he might have a head injury. However, after testing negative for a concussion, he was said to be okay by doctors and he was sent home. But when he got home from the hospital, he was not okay. He was a totally different person. Johnny's father, Michael, immediately noticed the change in his son's behavior. He just started acting really weird and erratic, and his thoughts weren't always coherent, and he was really agitated all the time. Yeah. It was just very obvious that something was off. And
it sounds like he 100% has some kind of brain
injury. Something's not.
I've heard of that, like people getting hit in the head and stuff, and like their personalities changing, and like it's kind of a scary thing to think about. Like you could literally fall down, hit your head, and when you come to, you could basically wake up a different person.
100%.
Isn't that wild?
It's insane.
I don't know. It's kind of freaky to me that it's just something as simple as just getting knocked in the head a little bit can change how you think and just like...
It change the whole rest of your life.
Your whole world.
It made Michael wonder, perhaps my son did get a head injury from that motorcycle
accident. Sounds like he did.
And the doctors just missed it. And so Michael scheduled 2 separate MRIs for Johnny to go to, but for whatever reason, Johnny refused to go. Around this time, Johnny's friends began to notice his strange behavior when in December of that year, he was at an acting class and he began speaking in a vaguely British accent. And everybody in the class noticed it, and eventually someone said, hey, why are you doing that? And Johnny was like, what? And just kind of shrugged it off and acted like he wasn't doing that. A few weeks later, on the morning of January...
Is he gonna like wake up and be like an English person or change into like is he just gonna have an accent all of a sudden?
A different one every time we wake up.
Yeah, every time he wakes up, he's a different person. That's not how it works, but I don't know. It's kind of funny.
January 3rd, 2012, Johnny was at his parents' house and he was sitting in the kitchen while his mom was making omelets. And Johnny just kind of abruptly says, I'm gonna go out for a walk. So he gets up, he's only got his pajamas on, no shoes on. He walks out the door, and as he's walking down the road, he gets maybe 10 or 15 feet away from his parents' house when he hears someone screaming, like they're screaming in distress. And he thinks it's coming from the apartment that was right next to his parents' house. And so he breaks into the apartment, but there's no one in the apartment. It's totally vacant. And so as he's in this apartment, wondering what's going on, the 2 men that owned the apartment, they came home and they see Johnny standing there, and they told him he had to leave immediately. and instead of leaving immediately, Johnny grabbed a nearby glass bottle and he charged at them and hit them both over the head with the bottle before they managed to restrain him and hold him down until the police showed up. Johnny...
Yeah, there's something going on with this guy's head. Why would he do that? I mean, if he was in his right mind, he could be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I thought I heard screaming here. I thought somebody was hurt and needed help. I'm not trying to rob you."
He didn't explain any of that. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean, but to immediately turn to violence and do something like that, like, that's, especially for like the character they said he was like he left Sons of Anarchy because it wasn't like who he was. He didn't like the gratuitous violence. He didn't like that stuff. Like, he was into poetry and writing and things like that.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden he's violent?
Yeah, it's
he left millions of dollars on the table.
Completely different behavior.
Yeah, there's something really up with this guy.
He claimed he was acting in self-defense, but the police didn't believe him, and so they charged him with trespassing, burglary, and assault with a deadly weapon, and they sent him to jail. When Johnny's father was finally able to come to the jail and bail his son out, it had been 8 days, and in those 8 days, Johnny had been moved from general population to a psych ward because he was banging his head against the inside of his cell, and at one point he had tried to jump off of a balcony, and he was just generally acting unhinged. And so when he was discharged, on his paperwork, a doctor at the jail had commented that he thought Johnny at one point must have had some sort of head injury that had made him act this way, and he was definitely suicidal. When Johnny got back to his parents' house, he was an absolute wreck. Physically, I mean, he had 2 black eyes and his face was all puffed up from the confrontation he had with those 2 men in the apartment, and emotionally, he was so distraught that he wouldn't let anyone in his family come near him. He just holed up in his room and just told everyone to stay away. He also became extremely sensitive to light, to the point where he was turning off all the lights in his parents' home, and then when they would eventually just turn them back on again, he would get agitated and turn them all off, and then finally he just disabled his parents' fuse box. But despite Johnny's obvious issues after coming home from jail, over the next few weeks, he did actually seem to be improving, to the point where at the end of January, so about a month after he came home from jail, his parents allowed him to move out and go live on his own in Santa Monica, California, about 30 minutes away. But as soon as he was living on his own, his troubles started again. On February 10th, so about a week after moving into this place in Santa Monica, he was arrested for punching some random stranger in the head outside of a yogurt shop, but he was ultimately released on $20,000 bail. A couple of days later, Johnny, fully clothed, just walked into the ocean, and when he was pulled out, he had to be brought to the hospital to be treated for hypothermia. A couple of days after getting out of the hospital, he was arrested again, this time for trying to break into a woman's apartment in Santa Monica. He claimed he thought it was his friend's apartment, but nobody believed him, so he was brought to jail and then released on bail again. After this second arrest in Santa Monica, Johnny's parents finally convinced him to go see a doctor about this potential head injury they thought he got from that 2011 motorcycle crash. Even though that jailhouse doc had suggested Johnny had a head injury, he had not officially diagnosed him. So Johnny needed another doctor to officially diagnose his head injury so they could begin to treat it. But the doctor Johnny wound up seeing did not suspect a head injury. Instead, he suspected schizophrenia or bipolar, which are 2 very serious mental disorders. And so he prescribed some medication to Johnny that would treat both of those disorders, and Johnny was on his way. Johnny refused to take the medication and refused to go see another doctor, and so his condition just continued to get worse. Johnny was still facing serious jail time for the break-in and assault against those 2 men in the apartment next to his parents' home, and so Johnny's lawyer was trying to get a deal done where Johnny would go to a mental health treatment facility for a year instead of going to jail for a year. But Johnny was so confident these charges would just get dropped and he'd be allowed to go back to his life and live the way he wanted to, that he fired his lawyer and he represented himself in court. But the charges were not dropped and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. However, the jail he was sent to was so overcrowded, they reduced his sentence all the way down to only 6 weeks. When Johnny's father...
From a year to 6 weeks? I thought they were going to say 6 months.
Yeah, even that. It's like, okay, cut in half, good deal, but that's kind of, I mean, what's the overcrowding like that's that bad?
Yeah.
I got... Like
a little over a month. There you go.
I mean, even a year in prison seems kind of like a lot for what he... I mean, he did attack somebody violently, and he has punched people and such, but it's obvious to me that this guy needs to be in some kind of like psych ward or something, you know?
finally came to pick him up from prison on Friday, September 21st, 2012, Johnny was at an all-time low. Even though he had only been in jail for 6 weeks instead of the year he was supposed to be there, it was clear that amount of time had done an enormous amount of damage to him. And so on the car ride home from prison, Johnny just kind of sheepishly asked his father, hey Dad, would it be possible if you called Kathy Davis at the writer's villa and just see if there's any way I can move back in? And Michael's thinking to himself, I hadn't thought of that, but the writer's villa was the last place Johnny was when his life was still in order. It was probably the last place he was happy, and so he probably has attached a lot of fond memories to that place, and so that's a great place for him to go. And so as soon as they got home, Michael called Kathy Davis and explained the situation and said, is there any way he can stay there? And she said, absolutely, the red suite is still available. I'll go up and make the bed right now. I can't wait to see him. Johnny stayed with his parents that weekend, and then on Monday, September 24th, he packed up his stuff and he moved back into the villa. 2 days later, a 70-year-old man named Dan Blackburn, who was actually neighbors to the writer's villa property, he was looking out his front window at this man who was standing out in the road. He only had on jeans and red shoes. He had no shirt on and he was very sweaty, and he was just kind of frantically pacing around the road, and he had never seen this guy before, and so he's just kind of poking out behind his curtain watching him to see what he's going to do next. And after about 15 minutes of this kind of strange pacing in the road, this guy turns and walks directly towards Dan's property, goes right up to the front step and starts knocking on the door. Dan was definitely a little bit concerned, but he shut the curtain, he walked over to the door, and he looks out the people, and there's this guy standing there with bright blue eyes that are all wide, and he's looking at the people as if he can see through and see Dan, but he can't. And so Dan reaches down and he opens the door just a little bit and he looks out, and the guy outside looks at him and goes, "Hi, I'm John. I'm your new neighbor." It would turn out John was Johnny Lewis. And so Dan opened the door a little bit farther and he looks at him and he goes, "Hi, John, nice to meet you." And before the two men could have any sort of conversation, Johnny just abruptly turned around and walked away. And so Dan is totally puzzled by this strange interaction he's just had with Johnny Lewis. And he's watching him as he just walks back to the road, he walks back over and goes inside the villa and disappears. And so Dan kind of shrugs it off, he shuts his door, locks it, and goes back to his morning routine. About 30 minutes later, Dan is doing his own thing in his house when he hears his wife outside screaming for him to come outside. And so Dan runs out the front door, he goes into his driveway, which is between his property and the writer's villa, and he sees his wife is standing on the driveway, horrified, pointing up towards the back of their house. He looks down, and back near their back deck, Johnny Lewis, is standing on top of the guy that Dan and his wife had hired that day to paint their back deck. Johnny is just raining blows down on this guy. He's got a piece of wood too that he's hitting him with, and the worker is sitting there trying to shield himself. There's blood all over him, and Dan instinctively just runs over to Johnny. Johnny's not seen Dan at this point. Dan gets right up to him and he grabs him by the shoulder and he tries pulling Johnny off. He's screaming at Johnny to stop, but Johnny just seems totally unfazed. He's just destroying this worker. And so finally, after Dan yanks on Johnny hard enough, Johnny jumps up, turns around, and levels Dan square in the face. Dan falls to the ground, and when he looks up, Johnny is just standing over him, looking at him with no expression on his face. It's like he didn't know what he was going to do with Dan next. So he just stood there and stared at him. But Dan wasn't going to waste any time. He jumped up and he clocked Johnny square in the side of the head, but it had no effect on Johnny. He still just stared at Dan, completely expressionless. And so Dan grabbed a nearby lawn chair and practically broke it over the head of Johnny, but again, it had no effect on Johnny. He just stood there completely expressionless, staring at Dan. And so at this point, Dan just grabs the worker who can barely stand, and he runs back down the driveway. He grabs his wife and they run towards the house to go inside. And the three of them manage to get inside the house, and as they're shutting the big heavy door, Johnny comes bounding up and he gets right in front and he jams his arm in the space between the door and the wall. So they can't close the door because it's getting stuck on his arm. And so all three of the adults inside, Dan, his wife, and the painter, are putting all of their weight on this huge wooden door onto Johnny's arm. And Johnny is just trying to grab them the whole time. And so finally, the three of them start raising the door and slamming it as hard as they can on Johnny's arm. And finally, after several hard blows to his arm, Johnny retracted protected his arm, and they were able to shut the door and lock it. And so at this point, Dan's wife and the painter ran around the house, closing every window, locking every door. Meanwhile, Dan went to the side window that looked out towards the writer's villa property, and he got his phone out and he called 911 as he's looking out the door looking for Johnny. And so after he tells 911 what's going on and he hangs up, Johnny suddenly just appears running down his driveway as if he's running back towards the back deck. But he stops almost right in front of Dan's window. He turns and he starts running towards the villa property. He jumps over a fence that's at least waist height, just jumps clear over it. And then he gets to this huge wooden fence that surrounded the entire villa property that was at least, 8, 9, 10 feet. And he very easily just jumps, grabs the top, and catapults himself right over the top, and then disappeared inside of the villa. Within minutes, the police showed up and they went inside the villa.
It sounds like he's on drugs.
They could not believe what they found. Based on the evidence, this is what investigators believe happened. After Johnny, for the first time, walked up to Dan's property and awkwardly knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I'm John, I'm your new neighbor." After that, he turned around and Dan watched him as he left his property and made his way back and went inside the villa. Once Johnny got inside the villa, he made his way up to the second floor and he went into Kathy Davis's room where she was sitting. Now, Kathy most likely turned and saw Johnny standing in the doorway. He's got no shirt on, he's sweating, he looks totally crazed. She probably was not scared. Instead, her motherly instincts kicked in and she probably said, "Hey, are you okay? Can I help you? What's going on?" And as she probably stood up and made her way over to make sure he was okay, Johnny, for reasons no one understands, proceeded to beat and kick and strangle her. And then when she fell to the ground and was totally helpless, Johnny proceeded to either stomp on her skull repeatedly or he hit her over the head repeatedly with a rusty hammer that was later found in his bedroom. But no matter how Johnny did it, he managed to severely fracture her skull, and that's what ultimately killed her. After killing Kathy, Johnny tracked down her beloved cat and killed the cat the same way.
Fuck?
Afterwards, Johnny ran out of the villa, and that's when he spotted Dan's house painter just sitting outside, and he walked over to him and just began beating him. And just like the attack on Kathy and her cat, this attack on this house painter appeared to have no motive as well. After Dan came outside and managed to fight Johnny off, and then when Dan went back inside the house with his wife and with the painter, Johnny stood outside for a few minutes before running down Dan's driveway and then hopping over those two fences right in front of Dan, and then Johnny disappeared inside of the villa. Once Johnny was in the villa, it's believed he climbed up to the upper patio or onto the roof of the villa itself, and from there he either jumped or fell to his death on the driveway below. His death was officially ruled an accident, not a suicide. After the news broke about what had happened at the writer's villa, everybody assumed Johnny must have been on some really hardcore drugs. That's the only explanation for why someone would act the way he acted.
Injury.
But when his toxicology report came back, it showed he had absolutely no drugs of any kind, legal or illegal, in his system. He was completely sober at the time he committed this horrible crime. Some believe Johnny really did have some undiagnosed head injury from that motorcycle accident, and this head injury is responsible for his violent outbursts. Others disagree and say the head injury had nothing to do with it. Johnny clearly had some undiagnosed mental disorder. Maybe it was schizophrenia, maybe he was bipolar, maybe it was something else, but it was this mental disorder that led to these violent outbursts. But to this day, no one knows for sure why Johnny did what he did. All we know is an innocent woman and her cat were needlessly killed. So that's going to do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section
we never
what
find
it
the
is
secrets.
and where you found it, so give us the timestamp.
There's always a secret in these things we never find. Let's switch screens, and I want to talk about that for 1 second here. It's scary to me that you can just get a bump on your head and so much can change. Mm-hmm. Don't you agree?
It can happen.
Like, this guy seemed to be kind. He seemed to be kind of like an artist, didn't even like the gratuitous violence in the TV shows he was working on. Sounds like he probably walked away from millions of dollars and did God knows what to his career, and all in the name of he just didn't want to be part of gratuitous violence. And he had one bad accident and it completely changed everything. It changed who he was at his core.
Yeah, someone said it was definitely the head injury. Learned about this a lot in undergrad.
Oh, did you really? You knew about this story? This is the first for me. It's too bad that he passed, too. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah, I guess these stories, at least these ones we've been watching, aren't too scary. But I know Mr. Ballen does some scary stuff. This is just the ones that were recommended to us this week. Mm-hmm. I think they were trying to keep on the celebrity theme. That's why we've been doing these. But who knows what's up for next week. But this was, it was good.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. It makes you think. And protect your head, man. Stay away from motorcycles, too. Mm-hmm. Those things are death traps.
Yeah.
My grandparents used to own a motorcycle shop, and I used to work there as a kid, and almost everybody that came in had some kind of injury. Like, everyone's always in a cast, or their face was all messed up, or they had scarring on them, and it's just, motorcycles are just dangerous. You know, even if you're the safest driver in the world, like, you're still competing against a car that's got 1,000+ more pounds on you. You're always going to lose, you know? I'll never get a motorcycle for that reason. A road bike, at least.
Yeah, thank
you know,
God.
dirt bikes are fun, but road bikes are a different story altogether. But yeah, no, I did not see where the story was going. I didn't recognize him, except for the photo of. You didn't recognize him from the OC or any of that stuff you watched? No, he didn't look familiar or whatever. I guess he dated Katy Perry, but just for a very brief time. But man, it seemed like the guy was on top of the world. You know, he had a good career going. He was dating pop stars, and just one hit to the head just changes you.
Yeah, that sucks.
Oh my God. Don't doctors call them donor cycles? Probably. I mean, doctors probably have a whole different slew of stories. I could just see it as a young kid, being like, why is everybody injured that comes into this shop? And it's because they're dangerous. You know, one person's not paying attention, and your life is over. They're fun. I grew up riding motorcycles. Trust me, like, they're a good time, but it's just
Very dangerous.
It's just not worth it. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's episode of Mr. Ballin. If you enjoyed hanging out with us and you enjoyed that episode, please consider liking and subscribing. We do this show every Tuesday on Twitch. All the links to that down in the description as well if you want to hang out with us live. But I hope you guys enjoyed. Say goodbye, Beans.
Say bye, Beans.
Bye. Say bye, Crystal.
Bye, guys.
All right, thanks for watching, everybody.